U.S. steel-related coal exports just collapsed by a staggering 94%, wiping out billions in trade and sending shockwaves through an already struggling industry. Massive piles of unsold coal are choking warehouses, contracts are vanishing, and entire towns are bracing for shutdown. A $1.5 million docking fee on foreign ships triggered the chaos, but now the damage is spreading fast. How did America go from powering the world to watching its export empire crumble in silence? For years, coal was more than just fuel for the United States. It was a symbol of industrial power. American coal didn't just stay home, it traveled the world. It powered steel mills in Asia, kept factories humming in Europe, and helped cities grow far beyond U.S. borders. It was the silent force behind countless skylines, roads, and railways. Even when the domestic use of coal started falling and cleaner energy began taking over, coal still had a second life overseas. As power plants at home shut down and demand faded, U.S. producers didn't panic. They pivoted. They turned to the global market, believing that as long as foreign buyers still needed it, the coal industry could survive.
Immediate thing for you to do is hope that this revives coal industry in your state.
And for a while, that strategy worked. American coal companies ramped up exports to countries like India, South Korea, and parts of Europe, where coal was still an essential part of steelmaking and energy production. These overseas markets were seen as the last great hope. Exporting coal became the backup plan, maybe even the only plan, for an industry that was already shrinking at home. It was a way to keep miners working, trains moving, and small towns from disappearing. As long as someone, somewhere needed coal, the U.S. could keep mining it. But in early 2025, the cracks started to show. What once looked like a stable export pipeline began to crumble. Shipments that had been routine were delayed or canceled. Long-standing contracts began to fall through. Buyers who once relied on U.S. coal began looking elsewhere, uncertain if they could still count on timely deliveries. The infrastructure, the ports, railroads, shipping routes that kept U.S. coal flowing across the globe suddenly became jammed with complications. And just like that, the industry's safety net began to tear. Then came the real shock. Within just a few months, U.S. coal exports didn't just decline, they collapsed. Down by an unbelievable 94%, the bottom fell out almost overnight. Trains that once carried coal to the coast stopped running. Terminals once buzzing with activity grew silent. And coal, the product itself, didn't suddenly become worthless. It was still the same high-grade fuel, still in demand in parts of the world. The problem wasn't the coal, it was the policies, the politics, and the fallout from Washington's decisions that had nothing to do with miners or exporters.
50% tariff come September on goods imported between a huge country that had, at some point, hoped to secure a trade deal with America.
Tariffs, port fees, and trade disputes choked off the very ships that were supposed to carry coal to buyers. The global supply chain, already fragile, buckled under the pressure. Countries turned to cheaper, easier options. And with no warning, the entire system collapsed. The coal industry didn't lose because it had nothing to sell. It lost because it no longer had a clear way to sell it. What was once seen as the fallback plan turned into a dead end, and the crash came faster than anyone expected. One of the most devastating hits to the U.S. coal export industry didn't come from the market or the environment, it came from a political decision that many didn't see coming. In early 2025, the U.S. government introduced a steep new tariff aimed at pressuring China during an ongoing trade dispute. The move involved slapping a massive docking fee, up to $1.5 million, on every cargo ship built in Chinese shipyards that docked at American ports. On the surface, it was framed as a bold, strategic maneuver in a larger geopolitical chess game. The message was clear. The U.S. was taking a hard stance against economic dependence on China. But the impact of this policy extended far beyond China. What Washington didn't seem to fully grasp or chose to overlook was the fact that the majority of global cargo ships are built in China. These ships aren't just moving electronics or consumer goods, they're the lifeline of U.S. coal exports. They carry millions of tons of coal from American ports to buyers around the world, especially to countries like India, South Korea, and parts of Europe that still rely on coal for steelmaking and industrial energy. By targeting these ships with crushing docking fees, the U.S. unintentionally crippled its own ability to get coal out of the country. Ship owners responded immediately. Faced with skyrocketing costs, many simply refused to send their vessels to U.S. ports. Others rerouted to countries where they could operate without the financial burden. Some canceled existing contracts altogether, unwilling to absorb the added expenses or navigate the growing uncertainty around U.S. trade logistics. The global shipping system operates on razor-thin margins and tight schedules. When a fee of that size gets added into the equation, the math stops working for most carriers.
15% tariff on U.S. coals. They're actually worried that the country could turn to other countries to meet their energy needs.
As a result, the U.S. coal export system began to fall apart almost instantly. Ports that once handled a steady stream of coal shipments became eerily quiet. Warehouses filled up with coal that couldn't be moved. Terminal space became scarce, and rail deliveries were slowed or halted because there was nowhere to unload. The ripple effect moved fast, from docks to rail yards to mines. Contracts that took months or even years to negotiate were dissolved in a matter of days. Exporters were left scrambling, trying to find alternative routes or carriers that either didn't use Chinese-built ships or were willing to eat the fee. Most weren't. This wasn't just a logistics nightmare. It turned into a full-blown trust crisis. Overseas buyers started questioning whether U.S. coal could be delivered on time or at all. Steelmakers and energy providers don't operate on hope. They operate on certainty. When delivery timelines start slipping and costs jump without warning, it doesn't matter how good the coal is. Buyers look for stability, and the U.S. could no longer offer it. Suddenly, the American coal industry, once seen as a reliable supplier, was viewed as unpredictable and risky. And that shift in perception is perhaps the most dangerous part. Once trust is broken in global trade, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. Buyers started locking in contracts with competitors like Australia and Indonesia, who offered cheaper, faster, and more consistent shipping options. These weren't just temporary changes, they were long-term shifts that could push the U.S. out of the market entirely. What was meant to be a punch at China ended up being a punch to the gut of America's own coal exporters. And with every canceled shipment and rerouted vessel, the industry edged closer to collapse, not because it lacked supply, but because it lost the ability to deliver. Across coal terminals in the United States, mountains of black rock are stacking up with nowhere to go. Exporters are in full-blown panic mode. What was supposed to be on ships weeks ago is now sitting in storage yards untouched. The flow of coal has come to a near standstill, and the clock is ticking. Exporters are warning that if this situation doesn't change in the next 60 days, they'll have no choice but to shut down operations entirely. That's not an exaggeration. That's how close they are to complete collapse. The problem isn't the supply. The coal is ready. It's mined, processed, and sitting in piles waiting for transport. The problem is everything else. The ships aren't coming, the buyers are canceling, and the system that once moved coal around the globe is frozen. When Washington added that $1.5 million tariff on China-built cargo ships, it triggered a chain reaction. Shipping companies didn't want to pay the penalty. Many backed out of their agreements. Some abandoned U.S. ports entirely. And with no one to carry the product, deals started to fall apart one after another. Contracts that took months to secure vanished in days. Foreign buyers who depended on U.S. coal began to walk away, not because they didn't need the coal, but because the logistics had become too unpredictable. These buyers need stability, and the U.S. couldn't offer it anymore. That's when the panic really started to spread. Exporters weren't just losing business, they were losing trust. And once trust disappears in global trade, it rarely comes back quickly. This isn't just a setback, it's a financial disaster. the U.S. coal export industry used to bring in over $130 billion in value. Now it's bleeding from every direction. Storage costs are rising. Rail lines are slowing down. Ports are sitting empty, and workers are being sent home. Every ton of coal sitting idle is money lost. And for smaller exporters who don't have deep reserves or long-term fallback plans, this could be the end of the road.
But the way the US president has introduced his second-term tariffs has sent shockwaves across the world.
When I first saw that sign, I wasn't sure if it was real.
While U.S. coal exports are stuck in chaos, other countries are racing ahead, and they're not looking back. Nations like Australia and Indonesia have stepped up in a big way. They're exporting more coal than ever, and buyers around the world are noticing. Their operations are smoother, their costs are lower, and most importantly, their shipping systems are reliable. That's giving them a major advantage at a time when the U.S. is struggling just to get product out the door. Australia, for example, has become a major supplier to Asian markets. Their coal is landing in places like India, South Korea, and Japan, countries that once bought heavily from the U.S. but are now turning elsewhere. It's not just because of pricing. It's because Australian ports are operating without drama, their shipping lanes are predictable, and their government isn't introducing new policies that scare off shipping companies. In this business, consistency is everything. And right now, the U.S. can't offer that. Indonesia is playing the same game. They're pushing exports hard and winning over buyers who are tired of waiting on U.S. shipments. Their delivery times are faster, their freight costs are lower, and they're not tangled in political conflicts that drive up expenses. For a buyer looking to keep energy supplies flowing smoothly, choosing between stable and unstable isn't a hard decision. And here's the real concern. Once buyers switch, they don't usually switch back. Trade relationships are built on trust and performance. If a company in India can get coal from Indonesia without delays or price hikes, why would they return to the U.S. later? These are long-term losses, not temporary dips. Every lost customer today is potentially a lost customer for years. The U.S. still produces high-grade coal, no doubt. But in global markets, the quality of the product isn't enough anymore. Buyers want the full package: clean transactions, stable logistics, affordable delivery, and zero surprises. Right now, the U.S. isn't delivering on any of those fronts, and the longer that continues, the more ground gets lost. In places like West Virginia, Kentucky, and Montana, coal isn't just a job, it's the backbone of entire communities. For generations, people in these towns have worked in the mines, driven the coal trains, loaded the ships, and kept the industry moving. It wasn't just how they made a living, it was how they built lives, raised families, and supported their neighbors. Coal put food on the table, sent kids to school, and kept small-town economies running. But now, those same towns are slowly falling apart, one family at a time. As coal exports crash and shipping deals vanish, the ripple effect is devastating. Miners are being laid off in waves. Rail workers who used to haul coal across states are being told to stay home. At the ports, staff who once loaded massive export shipments are clocking out for good. Truckers are seeing fewer deliveries. Mechanics, electricians, fuel station workers, they're all feeling it. It's like someone pulled the plug on the entire local economy and the lights are flickering. The impact doesn't stop at the job site. In these small towns, every part of daily life is connected to coal. When the mines slow down, so do the diners where workers eat lunch. The grocery stores see fewer shoppers. Schools lose funding as families move away. Hospitals face budget cuts. Churches see fewer donations. Even Little League teams struggle to stay afloat because local sponsors can't afford to help anymore. It's not just an industry that's collapsing, it's an entire way of life. For many in these regions, coal was the only job in town. There aren't many backup options. These aren't cities with growing tech hubs or booming industries to absorb the job losses. And moving isn't easy when you've lived in the same house for 30 years, when your parents are next door, and your kids are in school. Retraining programs sound great in headlines, but on the ground, they're slow, underfunded, and not tailored to people who've spent their lives underground or operating heavy machinery. If you're in the coal industry right now, trying to make sense of government policy probably feels like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. One day, leaders talk about bringing coal back, about fighting for energy independence and saving coal jobs. The next day, those same leaders announce tariffs, make decisions that hurt global trade, or roll out climate policies that tighten the squeeze on coal operations. For many people watching from the ground, it's hard to tell whether the government is trying to help or quietly walking coal toward the edge. The $1.5 million docking fee on China-built cargo ships is a perfect example. On paper, it looked like a tough move against a foreign competitor, but in practice, it hurt American coal exporters more than anyone. These ships were the ones moving coal overseas. Once they pulled out, contracts collapsed, buyers fled, and the coal industry started bleeding out. Exporters weren't even the target of the policy, yet they took the hardest hit. That's the kind of blindside that's leaving the industry confused and furious. Investors are watching this chaos unfold and backing away. For them, the energy sector is already risky. Volatile prices, shifting demand, and global competition make it a tough space to bet on. Add in political decisions that seem to flip-flop every few months, and the entire market becomes too unstable to touch. Why would anyone put money into expanding coal operations when the rules might change again next quarter? That uncertainty is killing momentum and cutting off the flow of private capital just when the industry needs it most. And the workers? They're stuck in the middle. They hear one message from a podium and see a completely different story unfold in their paychecks and communities. They're told the government has their back, but every action says otherwise. It's not just frustrating, it's demoralizing. These are people who've done their jobs, followed the rules, and kept the country running. Now they're being hit with layoffs while politicians argue over trade and climate policy with no clear plan forward. There was a time when coal ruled America's energy grid. Just a few decades ago, more than half of the electricity in the U.S. came from coal. It powered homes, schools, factories, you name it. If you turned on a light or charged a phone, chances were it came from coal-fired power. But those days are long gone. Fast forward to today, and coal's share has dropped to just 15%. That's not a small dip, that's a collapse. And it's not just happening here. The entire world is shifting fast toward cleaner, cheaper, and more efficient energy sources. And coal, for all its history, is struggling to find a place in this new reality. One of the biggest reasons behind this shift is economics. Renewable energy like wind and solar isn't just cleaner, it's also become a lot more affordable. Utility companies that once relied on coal are now running the numbers and realizing that switching to renewables or natural gas saves them money in the long run. Wind turbines and solar panels require less maintenance. Natural gas burns cleaner and is often cheaper to transport. It's a win-win for both cost and climate. So more and more companies are making the switch and not looking back. Even industries that were once tightly tied to coal, like steelmaking, are changing direction. Steel production has always been one of the biggest consumers of coal because of the high heat and energy needed. But now, cleaner technologies are entering the picture. Countries are investing in hydrogen-powered steel plants or electric arc furnaces, which use recycled metals and far less coal. Nations that once relied heavily on American coal are redesigning their infrastructure to reduce emissions and meet climate goals. And once those new systems are in place, they're not going back to the old ways. This shift is also driven by public pressure. Around the world, people are demanding action on climate change. Governments are responding with policies to reduce carbon emissions. International agreements, carbon taxes, clean energy targets, they're all stacking up. And in the middle of that storm is coal, carrying a heavier environmental burden than almost any other energy source. With every year that passes, it becomes harder for countries to justify using it when cleaner alternatives are not just available, but often cheaper. For U.S. coal, this isn't just a market problem. It's a sign of a deeper transition. The industry is trying to hold on while the world is moving on. And without major innovation or support to pivot toward the future, coal is being left behind. This isn't about a bad quarter or a tough season. It's the end of an era. one where coal powered the world and now struggles to keep its foot in the door. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.